What's going on? Welcome back in to the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral. You're checking us out right here on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube channel, or you're watching or you're listening to us on the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. We're getting you through the NBA offseason. We're inching closer to offseason prep and kind of preseason, kind of camp going on later on in the month. But for now, it'll be more off-season talk on the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral. We appreciate everybody watching us on the SpursCentral YouTube channel, and you can check us out on the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral on my own social media machines at Joe Gaither6 on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We invite you to jump in and leave us a comment right there. And we're here with Matt Guzman, just like we are each and every week. Thanks so much for joining us, Matt. Make sure you follow him at MattGZMan. Make sure you read all of his great work at San Antonio Spurs on SI. Just type in Spurs SI in your Google machine. It'll be the first thing that comes up, and he is getting you through the off season. And how are you doing that, Matt Guzman? How are you doing today?
I'm good. We're 1 week closer to the beginning of preseason, to the beginning of the regular season. Feels great to be back. Obviously, like you said, we're in the off season right now, the dead of the off season, but we are that much closer. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. Last week, we left off in the middle of your series, 5 Beyond Wemby, and you've got 2 more done. You got your third. We teased the Blake Wesley article. So we're going to talk about Blake Wesley, and we're going to talk about Jamari Bouye, and then we're going to tease the final one. So hopefully everybody goes to San Antonio Spurs on SI and reads about 5 impactful players for the Spurs that are not named Victor Wembanyama. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama, superstar. He's going to get all the headlines. Don't worry. We'll give you all the Victor coverage in the season. But for now, we have focused in on Stephon Castle. We have focused in on Harrison Barnes. And next, we're going to go to Blake Wesley. So you're right about Blake Wesley on San Antonio Spurs on SI in your 5 Beyond Wemby. He is number 3. What did you learn about the guard from Notre Dame?
Yeah, so obviously Blake Wesley is one of those players where you look at the roster, you look at the stats. He didn't exactly jump off the page, but he's a player that kind of has a lot of grit to him. And he's also a player where, there's certain skill levels, or I guess skill sets, or certain traits that players can possess that teams just really like to see. And sometimes you might not understand why the team is keeping them around or giving them so much play. We saw it with the Lakers and a guy like Taurean Prince. He got a lot of minutes under Darvin Ham, and Blake Wesley was earning his minutes under Greg Popovich. And it's one of those things where the Spurs are still in this limbo state. They have Victor Wembanyama, but they're still developing a lot of their young talent, Blake Wesley included. And so to see him get a lot of minutes, some people might have been a little perplexed because he's not the superstar, or he's not this ridiculously flashy point guard that, obviously deserves all these minutes. He's just he's doing it at his own pace. He's learning his own way. And so what I learned is that really the biggest thing about Blake Wesley and his game and the potential that the Spurs see with him is how good his defense is. He's known for that defensive prowess, but he's still learning to play the game as a point guard, which is something that Greg Popovich kind of commented on last season, is that he was beginning to understand his role a little bit better on offense. He's not super big. He's not super, he's not bulk, but he's shifty. He can get to the rim. He's quick. And on defense, he's a pest. And in the modern day NBA, if you have a great defense, you're going to earn yourself more minutes versus somebody who, can shoot really well, but doesn't exactly play defense. And so that's kind of where he stands out. And I think that in year 3, he's going to try and aim to get those, I guess, his point guard level up to where his defensive level is and kind of take that step forward.
All right, so you got Blake Wesley, and you went out and drafted Stephon Castle to eventually be a point guard, and you signed Chris Paul to be the point guard, be that veteran leader. Where does he fit in this roster as far as rotation? And really the bigger question, and the more important question from my perspective, is what can his ceiling be this season? Can he overtake Chris Paul and say, okay, old man, you're going to have to lead us from the bench because I have ascended my game to X point? What do you think he fits in this group?
I think where he was last season, he was coming off the bench unless he got, I think he got just a few starts. I can double check that here in a second. But, he was mainly a bench point guard, and that's kind of the role that I expect him to be at this upcoming season as well. When you ask about his ceiling, I'm not so sure he's going to take over Chris Paul or take over Stephon Castle.
Only started 3 games last year.
Say it one more time.
Only started 3 games last
That's
year.
right. So he didn't start very often. Most of the time he was playing off the bench. But the games that he got the most minutes, it was pretty evident that he was getting a lot of second half, third quarter, fourth quarter minutes. And that's kind of where he was earning his points and earning his stats. I think that it's not necessarily his role to take over Stephon Castle or take over Chris Paul. But, at this point in time, when the Spurs have so many young assets, he's at a position where if he can I think his ceiling is he can be a true dual threat point guard, a true, like, you plug him into the offense and you're going to get some, he's not going to make dumb turnovers. He's not going to, he's going to be able to find players where they need to be found and hit passes. And he's going to be able to lock down on defense. If you have a tough guy you're guarding and you need a point guard that can kind of hang in there and maybe one of your other guys is tired, you put in Blake Wesley and you can trust that he won't let up easy shots. And so I think his role is to kind of be a utility player for the Spurs, which honestly for him is a really good place to be. If you can be a utility player for somebody like Victor Wembanyama, that means you're doing something right.
All right, let's move on to number 4 in your 5 Beyond Wemby series, and you can read about it on San Antonio Spurs on SI, sitting right up there on the front page. Let's talk about Jamaree Bouyea. Jamaree Bouyea been with the Spurs for just a very short time. Played in 3 games last year, but he's a little more familiar with the Austin Spurs. Got signed to a 2-way contract this past season. Where does he fit in 2024?
Right. He's a player that I really liked. I think the way I described him, he was an exception. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. In this case, it was very much a good thing. After they converted Dominic Barlow, who's no longer with the team, to a standard contract at the end of last season. He was previously on a 2-way. So putting him into a standard contract left one more 2-way spot open. That's where Jamaree Bouyea came in, and honestly, it says enough about him that they liked enough of what they see, or they liked what they saw enough to not only extend him for the remainder of the season as a 2-way player, but they signed him to a 2-year deal. So they wanted him for the entirety of the season to follow. And so, he already kind of earned his spot when Summer League rolled around. He wasn't having to fight for it, but he also had to prove enough to warrant himself being around. And that's exactly what he did. He was a standout at Summer League. There was one game where he had, I think, 2 clutch 3-point shots to tie up a game to keep the Spurs alive. And it went 4-1 in Las Vegas behind him at point guard. And he was a player that, he's 25 years old. He's old for being just a second-year player. He's old for having not spent too much time in the league. But at the same time, he's still very young. He still has a lot of room to grow. And I think that the Spurs really like where that's at and what they can do with him, especially if he's going to be spending time both in Austin and San Antonio.
All right, so the 5th one is not out yet. Well, actually, no, let's stay on Bouyea for one more second because I'm going to play the dummy here, as I often do. We've got Chris Paul, same sort of question as with Blake Wesley. We've got Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, and now Blake Wesley. Are we expecting, like I see, last year with the Spurs, only 3 games on the main roster. Are we expecting to see Bouyea a lot this year, or is he just going to be okay, we're calling you up if Chris Paul can't go in case, old man, sometimes things happen, or what is for the average fan when they turn on the Spurs, how often are we going to be seeing Jamaree Bouyea?
Right. And he's a name, that's why I kind of wanted to write about him, is because not often. He's going to be a player that is going to spend a lot of time in Austin developing. But I think what the Spurs are hoping for is that if he spends all that time in Austin, he's going to continue to improve to a point where they can bring him up and trust that he can get some meaningful minutes in a game that matters. Like you said, if Chris Paul goes out and he's hurt and Blake Wesley is not doing so hot, or Trey Jones is not doing so hot, they have a guy like Jamaree Bouyea who, knowing, and this is something that all 2-way players can share, they know that any moment that they get in an NBA game is very meaningful, is almost a tryout of sorts. That's an opportunity they don't want to waste or take for granted. So you put in Jamaree Bouyea, he's going to be like, well, this is my chance to shine. I'm going to show you what I can do. And the good thing about Jamaree, what he showed at Summer League, is that doesn't exactly mean he's going to hog the ball the entire time and try to prove to you that he can score, because he knows he can, but he's going to do what he can to prove that he can be a team player, he can fit into a system, and that and when he's called upon, he can produce in multiple different ways.
You highlighted the age at 25, and while that doesn't sound old, it is old for a developmental NBA player. What do you think the chances are that he can continue to grow his game and become a full-time NBA player?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that he's somebody that, like I mentioned, his age is a factor because you don't necessarily want to take a chance on a 25-year-old if you've got this 19, 20-year-old that's already kind of, a step ahead. But, if the benefit of having that age is that he's seen some things. He's been with the Heat, he's been with the Spurs now. And so, he's a player that's not going to make these dumb, careless errors. He's also going to carry a mindset with him where he realizes where he's at. He realizes that he's unique at being 25 and still looking for this role, like any kind of role with the team. And so I think that he's a player that, he's got the heart, he has the mindset for it. He definitely has the skill. It's just his chance to next time he gets that opportunity to prove it. And if it's not with the Spurs, another team can be looking on and say, well, hey, here's what Jamar Bouye did. We kind of need a utility player over here. He's definitely a player that stands a chance making it.
All right, let's move on and tease number 5 because it's not quite out yet, but it might be out by the time you listen to this. And we encourage you guys to download the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon as you're checking out the 5 Beyond Wemby series. So who's number 5? Let's open up door number 5 and find out who you're going to be writing about and kind of get a little teaser on him.
Absolutely. Well, he's a player that was in the 5 Beyond Wemby last year. This is Devin Vassell. He's expected to be the second-hand man to Victor Wembanyama, and they paid him as such last year. And I guess injuries kind of hampered the back half of his season a little bit. He took a step forward, but he wasn't taking that superstar step forward that maybe he had hoped for, that maybe the Spurs had hoped for. But this year he's already made it his goal. He doesn't want to sit out a single game. He kind of knows that he's got more to prove, and they're paying him as such, especially with Victor getting better as the years go on. That's a chance for him to also improve, but also benefit from the fact that his teammate is going to be making him better at the same time. So I do like that pairing. I think he's a very elite scorer. I think that he has some things, he can be a little more consistent with his jump shot, but, this year, if any, is the year for him to really take that step forward and prove, hey, this is why I'm getting paid like this. This is why I should be one of the foundational pieces of this core moving forward. And here's exactly who I am and what I can do.
All right, Devin Vassell last season starting 62 of the 68 games that he played in and scoring my points per game, 19.5 points per game. So really filling it up for the Spurs as that number 2 man. Still just 23, 24 years old. So still growing and younger, obviously, than Jamar Bouye, who we just highlighted. What do you think that his potential is as far as becoming, okay, this can be a shooting guard, this can be a 2-guard, a scorer who can become, okay, top 20 player in the league, top 25 player in the league? Because you're not going to need much as you continue to see Victor ascend and grow his game. You just surround him with a couple, top 50 players. Can Devin Vassell continue to grow his game? And what does he need to do to grow his game to become maybe a top 20 player?
Yeah, I think it comes down to consistency. Obviously like I mentioned, the injuries kept him from playing as many games as he had hoped for, but next season, if he makes it his goal to be healthy and he ends up being healthy, he needs to also produce like he's healthy. You mentioned he's just under that 20-point threshold per game in points. If he takes a little step forward and he averages 22, all of a sudden that's a second 20-point per game score that the Spurs have, and that's better than they did last year. That way, if you have 2 guys that you can count on regularly for 20 points, and that's Victor doing his thing on defense and offense, and that's Devin Vassell just shooting the lights out. You can have all these other players. You can have Keldon Johnson or Jeremy Sohan or Trey Jones or Stephon Castle. If any one of them take turns scoring 20 points a game, or they have breakout games along with your Victor and your Devin pairing, that's a much better team than last season. And I think that's what makes him so important, is that he has the potential to be the number 2 star and really be a rising star. If it wasn't already for the few years he's had in the league, he could be on that rising stars team, with much more to prove and much more to grow. But I think that, he's a player that definitely wants to show that. And if he can make that step and really become that consistent 20-point per game scorer, the Spurs will be in a lot better place.
All right, let's keep it rolling here with Matt Guzman as we encourage you to check out all his great work at San Antonio Spurs on SI. We're hanging out on the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral. And we want to talk about another piece that you put up right there. It's about gambling and odds. And Matt, I love gambling and odds. I don't like to lose money, so I don't play that often, but I do keep a close watch on it. So let's look at some of these preseason awards and see where we can spend our hypothetical money. Again, this is hypothetical money. NBA, we'll start at the top. NBA MVP Victor Wembanyama plus 2,000 is the 8th best odds to win NBA MVP. Obviously, you got guys like LeBron James. You're going to have guys that are in the top end, Nikola Jokic, that are going to be ahead of Victor Wembanyama. But just off the top, it may not be it may not be a wise investment, but what does it say about Victor Wembanyama that he's at least in the top 10 of guys considered to be in the NBA MVP conversation?
Absolutely. I mean, it means that he's doing what he needs to be doing. Entering the league, he had these monumental expectations, and we're already comparing him to LeBron James. And the hype he was receiving before being drafted was similar to what LeBron James got back in 2003. This is a player where he was expected, the most possible was expected of him, and he came out and he proved that, yes, I will be that player that you're saying I'm going to be. So the fact that he's already top 10 in MVP means he's on the right track. That's rare. You never see that for a year 2 player. And if he gets even one vote for MVP, one first place vote, that is, I think that is a perfect spot for him. He does not need to win it this season, but if he can get one first place vote, if he can convince one of those voters that he is the most valuable player in the league, I think he's well on track to earning multiple of those throughout his career.
All right, let's move to an award where he is the favorite. Defensive Player of the Year. He finished second last year to Rudy Gobert. It may not be the smartest place to spend your money because the odds are only minus 200, but the only good bets are winning bets, so it might be the smartest place to put your money. Matt, what do you think? Can Victor Wembanyama overtake his fellow Frenchman and become the Defensive Player of the Year?
I do. And it's interesting because, this is where you kind of get into that category of whether it's voter fatigue or recency bias. Not everybody is on board with Rudy Gobert anymore after this summer. That's pretty clear. And it's not that he's a bad player. It's not that he's a bad defender. He works very well in the Minnesota Timberwolves system. Just as Victor works well with the Spurs on defense, he kind of anchors that team. And if they take the step forward, it will look a lot better because the Spurs are not expected to be a 21 team this season. They should be taking steps forward to prove that they're on the right track. And so, I really do think that Victor stands that good chance to, I think he's going to get votes for Defensive Player of the Year. He already got second place. And I don't see any issue with him going ahead and taking that first place away from Rudy Gobert. And he even said it himself at the end of last season that, Rudy can win it this year because the rest of the years it's mine. And I really believe that he's going to go and get that.
Yeah, he's going to unseat everything that Rudy has ever done from a French big man perspective. And so Rudy Gobert's holding on to his last little bits of his legacy, I guess, as the best French big in the NBA.
That's right. And that's totally okay. I think Rudy's had a great career. He's got 4 Defensive Player of the Year trophies to prove for it. Now it's Victor's turn, and I think he's going to take that step forward on defense now that he doesn't have to find his footing at the beginning of the season.
All right, Matt, we're going to play with a hypothetical $100, and we're going to combine the next 2 categories. And I'm going to ask you, where would you rather who spend your money? Where do you which side is more likely to win? You got 6th man of the year, Keldon Johnson at plus 5,000, 24th best odds. That's great value. You put that $100 on there, it returns you $5,000 for Keldon Johnson's win, right? You love that. Trey Jones at plus 12,500. So man, even longer odds, 69th best odds to win 6th man of the year. Or we'll go to the next category and say Stephon Castle to win Rookie of the Year at plus 2,000. Still pretty great return. You bet your $100, you get $2,000 back. Great return. He has the 4th best odds to win Rookie of the Year. So which horse are you backing? Keldon Johnson? It's really a 2-man race. Keldon Johnson at plus 5,000 to win 6th man of the year, or Stephon Castle at plus 2,000 to win Rookie of the Year?
I think I'm going to put my $100 on Stephon Castle. I think, he's got 4th best odds. He was picked number 4 overall. Naturally, he's going to fall that way. But, what he has that these other rookies don't have is he's going to be magnified, and his impact is going to be magnified because he's playing next to a player like Victor. And so seeing what he can do, and if he can create, all he has to do is learn from Chris Paul, learn how to get Victor the ball in his spots, and produce a little bit on his own. And he's going to look like this all-star point guard that, the Spurs have been waiting for. He won't make the all-star team, unfortunately, unless he goes crazy. But, that's a guy that the people in front of him are kind of stepping into these systems where they are going to be one of the best players. Stephon Castle's in the same way, but the difference is the best player in front of him is way up here, top 10 in the league almost. And so, he's going to be magnified. His game is going to look a lot better, a lot more polished, especially with a guy like Greg Popovich coaching him. So I'm going to go ahead and take that bet.
And I do think that's probably smart. I mean, you got lots of great six men around the NBA, and you're going to be competing with really, really high-level talent. We highlighted it. We talked about it before the draft process. Not a very strong. I mean, who is Stephon Castle's biggest competition for NBA Rookie of the Year? Is it the young man? Is it Reed Shepherd who went to Houston? Who you really think about it? Obviously Atlanta got the international prospect that they think is going to be really, really good, stretch forward kind of a type. Like Castle might have the most opportunity of any of these rookies.
I would agree.
Trying to blow smoke up his butt because this is a Spurs podcast, but who else would you contend to say, okay, this rookie is going to have a really high volume opportunity to say, oh, I'm going to, fill up the stat sheet.
Right. I mean, I would say Alex Sarr in Washington.
Okay. Yes.
That's a system where Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma have just not worked together, and there's a lot of opportunity. They don't have they don't have a direction right now. They're going to be bottom of the league again. I don't really see the vision. I think Alex Sarr is a great player. I don't know. It's going to be similar to putting Cade Cunningham in Detroit, where, that's a great, great player. They had Monty Williams as a coach, and they just still couldn't really get off the ground. I don't see Washington taking a much bigger step forward this season, but I do see Alex Sarr getting a lot of touches, a lot of opportunity, and if he can prove that he himself is a great producer and a great scorer, he has a chance.
All right, I think that that would be, as we're looking at this whole list, even including MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, that sort of thing, when you consider all the odds, I think that Stephon Castle, that would be where I'd lay my hypothetical $100. Sure. Let's hit the last category because it made me scratch my head. Most improved player. And the Spurs have the favorite, the NBA favorite. Victor Wembanyama is the NBA favorite at plus 800 for most improved player. I mean, what's this all about, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting category because all of the eyes watching for this award are going to be on Victor in year 2, not because they're wanting to give him the award, but because they want to see how much better he can get. They want to see what that will look like going from his rookie season that was already a hit to his sophomore season, where he doesn't have to adjust. He just has to go in and play the game that he ended season 1 playing, essentially. And so it's interesting to see him atop that list because he technically is the favorite. Because if he comes out and he scores more points and if he averages a double-double with blocks, if he averages a double-double with rebounds and gets up to 6 blocks or 5 blocks a game, he has a chance to make some monumental jump on the defensive end, where all of a sudden, at the beginning of the season where he wasn't averaging double-doubles, now he's a consistent 25-10 player or 20-10 player or 20-10 and 5-5. He's a player that will look ridiculous on the stat sheet. And simply because he wasn't quite there last season, all of a sudden he's the most improved player, which is really interesting to think about because he finished the season on such a high note. If he plays the entire season the way he did the last 5-10 games, he will win most improved player because by definition, he will have improved. It's just interesting because all of the eyes are going to be on him already, so he kind of gets that advantage.
Yeah, I mean, when I normally think of most improved player, I think of, okay, a bench contributor, a six-man who's gone from a six-man to starter, or gone from, contributor to all-star type player. It's kind of crazy to think about Victor, who's going to be all-star already caliber, going from really, really good to, oh, this guy is all-time great right in front of our eyes. And hopefully this season.
If you were to put, names on the categories, like you said, bench player to contributor or contributor to all-star, he's going from rookie to NBA superstar because he's already hitting that level. And if he continues to improve the way he does, he will. And he'll be atop the MVP list. He'll be atop the Defensive Player of the Year list. He'll be atop all of these lists and stat categories, in due time. And so this is really just the first of many because he can't, even if he doesn't win MVP in his second season, that's not expected of him. He can win most improved player and then go on to win MVP or go on to win, Defensive Player of the Year. So it's just one of those things where he's very much he's an anomaly in every sense of the word. It's been special to watch him, and I think he's going to continue to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Looking forward to this year, and it gets started in just a couple of weeks with preseason action, and you can follow it all at San Antonio Spurs on SI. Make sure you follow Matt Guzman at Matt GZ Man on the Twitter machine. Let's close this bad boy out with a more bigger picture NBA topic. I almost said David Silver. I almost said David Stern. No, Michael Adam Silver. Oh my gosh, I had so many commissioners' names all in my head. Adam Silver on Tuesday talked about NBA expansion. And that's something, obviously, the NBA's popularity is really, really still growing and growing and growing. The young generation, really my generation and your generation, loves the NBA. And really, what's not to love with all the great talent across all the great markets? And so Adam Silver is asked about expansion, and the obvious targets go back to Seattle, the Seattle Supersonics. Okay, you rob Seattle of a franchise, and you get a little talk of Vegas. Obviously, you see the Las Vegas Raiders and their success, and the Oakland Athletics and the baseball side of things flirting with Las Vegas as well. So now that I finally got my commissioners' names all straightened out, Adam Silver basically said that this was not going to happen right now. Not going to happen right now, but basically they're going to have conversations this year about, are we going to take this step? Are we going to expand past 30? Are we going to grow? Are we going to give Seattle a franchise back? Or is it going to be Las Vegas? Or maybe another city somewhere in America or outside of America contributes and becomes a franchise? Matt, what's your take on all this? I mean, obviously, we're used to the 30 franchises. Oklahoma was the last new franchise, but they were really a transplant from Seattle. You obviously had New Orleans go from New Orleans to you had Charlotte to New Orleans to Oklahoma, back to New Orleans. Then you had Charlotte come up as all kinds of movement with the Charlotte Hornets and Bobcats and such. But you haven't had any movement in the NBA really since then. That was, oh my gosh, sometime around Katrina. So what was that for me? I'm old, all my years run together. Is that 2010-ish or so when Charlotte and New Orleans finally gets their franchise, the Pelicans, and then Charlotte reverts as the Bobcats. Now they're the Hornets again. That's roughly 2010, right? So it's been 14 years or so since you've expanded in the league. What's your take on NBA expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a welcome change. I think whenever it does happen, it will be very good for the league and for the money. It's something you have to think about that most people might not consider. When you expand in the NBA, it's because you have the money, it's because you're making revenue, and it's a chance to make more money, which in turn will pay the players more. So you're going to see bigger contracts. You're going to be able to see a $500 million 4-year contract, whenever that does, whenever the CBAs and the salary caps reach that level. I like the idea of it. I think Adam Silver, obviously he has to put on a face of some kind. He's not just going to let you in on all the secrets and what's being talked about right now. And he had mentioned that TV deals were first and then expansion was next. And so over the offseason, that was one of the big things. Obviously, we talked about NBA on TNT, and just the impact that's going to have. That was part of those TV deals. So now the next big obstacle facing the NBA is, hey, what are we going to do about expansion? Are we going to expand? When can we expand? And Adam Silver he put it simply, he said, not ready yet. Not going to happen this year, maybe not even next year, or maybe it doesn't happen until 5 years from now, and they make it. Maybe they'll agree to terms with Seattle to move an NBA team in 2029. And we're like, oh, we got to wait all that time, But I think we're at that range where now we can start to think about where it's going to be and when's it going to happen. And obviously, Seattle, Las Vegas are the two atop that list. Mexico City's even been thrown out there. The NBA likes to play games down there, cities like Kansas City, nobody in Missouri has an NBA franchise. And so there's definitely multiple places for them to check out, and they're going to be scouting and monitoring those arenas when they happen. The Big 12 championship happens in Kansas City at T-Mobile Center. Seattle, they play games in Seattle. I think the Clippers will play a preliminary game up there. Mexico City, they'll have their games there. They even had games in France. So who knows what they're thinking? They can move up to Canada. There's just so many different possibilities that could happen. I like that he's kind of taking a stance of saying, just hold your horses. It's going to happen, but not yet. And I think whenever it does start to unravel a little bit more, we'll know a lot better. We'll be able to kind of tell when and where it's going to happen.
Are going to end up putting like 4 teams in France and England, just kind of like London, Paris, kind of, Spain, just to have like a little division across over there in Europe to start biting into some of that market share. And that's going to be like, that's why he's holding off, so that they can get 3 or 4. Oh, we're actually not going to expand by 1. We're going to expand by 4, and they're going to go in these 4 cities, and they're all going to be in international markets. But that'll be maybe 10 years away. We'll see.
That's right.
Total hypothetical. Total just off the wall thought.
That'd be something.
We'll have a lot of fun catching up with you. Off season continues next week. I see a topic out there that we can get into, these first round draft picks, the capital that San Antonio has, and what they're going to do over the next couple of years. They have a bunch of first round draft picks from all over the league. So we will talk about that as we're a couple of weeks away from preseason camp getting started. Make sure you follow Matt Guzman again at Matt GZ Man. Make sure you follow his San Antonio Spurs on SI at SAS on SI on the Twitter machine. You can read all their great work at San Antonio Spurs on SI, and check out all their videos right here on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube channel. We'll be back next week for another edition. Thanks so much for joining us, Matt, for another edition of the Joe Gaither Show on San Antonio Spurs on SI.